Hello, welcome to Math for All, where we like to make math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. I'm Molly Vokey.
And I'm Heidi Subnani. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really excited to speak with our friend TJ, and we hope that you will follow along on X and same handle for Blue Sky. We'll put that up there in a minute, or we'll make that change in a little bit. Also on YouTube and on Facebook. We also have a webpage where you can find out more information about the shows that are upcoming or that have already taken place, and where you can see us in person next.
Yes. And if you're interested in some math activators, we have a book that's out through Didex. Oddly, I don't have it right beside me, which I normally do.
Put it away, so that's.
I know. I must have been using it. Yes, winning. So anyways, you can find it at Didex if you are interested. And we are going to be talking to TJ about how our language as educators shapes the beliefs, actions, and mathematical agency of our students. So that should be an interesting conversation. We've talked a lot about language, but not necessarily about like educator language. So I think this will be an interesting conversation. So we are going to be talking with TJ Jemison today, who is a dynamic and experienced math workshop presenter and educational consultant who works with schools and districts to improve math instruction. He has extensive experience as a special educator, curriculum developer, and math coach who has taught math to all ages from pre-K to grade 8. He facilitates math professional development sessions and ongoing coaching across the United States and internationally. He is a co-author of the book on mathematics and children's literature, Math by the Book. So let's bring him in.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're supposed to say that to you. But thanks for welcoming us. We appreciate it.
We love it, and so glad that you can be here with us tonight. And we would love to start and hear a little bit about what is your math story.
Great. Well, try to keep it brief because I'm older, so your math story is longer. I'll just say all through elementary, middle school, high school, I was a good math student, got good grades, right? I was a good mimicker in the time of building thinking classrooms. And one story I remember is my grandmother used to go insane. I lived with my grandmother and my mom and grew up with them. And she used to go insane because I would do my math homework in front of the TV. And my mom would be like, he gets straight A's. What can I say? She let me. So I went to school, didn't know what I wanted to do, had to transition like many mid-20-year-olds don't really have a direction, right? And so education kind of happened later for me. I got my BA, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, realized I really liked working with young kids through some like extended friends family, because I was the youngest in my family. So no kid experience until I was in my mid to late 20s. Realized I want to work with kids and went back, got my master's degree in education. I got a dual certification of consulting teacher, which allowed me to do K through 12 special education, and as a reading coordinator, and that allowed me to do reading K-12. So I had this really cool kind of infusion. I took zero math classes about how to teach math. So I get into schools, I have a caseload of kids on IEPs. I know nothing about teaching math except how I learned it. So I would say it again, say it louder, teach the algorithm, all the things we really shouldn't be doing now, at least. So I was doing all those things and they were not effective. I had years where I was not an effective teacher. And so I went through this whole transition, all being an employee of a school district in Vermont, just outside of Burlington, and realized I was just not good at doing math the way that we were supposed to be teaching math. So I was trained as a math recovery teacher, and began working with adults, and realized, oh, I like working with adults as well. And I like the intersection of working with kids and adults at the same time. So I've had about 20 so years now of doing professional development myself, as well as with others, around math content and math pedagogy. So that's kind of where I got to and how I landed here. And through that, I had lots of experiences working on curriculums, working on different programs. So yeah, that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Interesting that you didn't even know that you liked working with kids until you were already a professional. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it took a long time.
I like that. I like it. Awesome.
You're not like the only, it's always fun for us because so many people come at the work that we do like sideways or like after a detour or had like very different plans for what they were going to do. I mean, like occasionally we'll have someone who was like, oh yeah, no, this is what I was going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's always an interesting experience to hear how people interact with math and get to being in the place where they are about using and like educating others.
And my plan had nothing to do with math, right? I was going to be a special educator, and then I was trying to be a reading teacher. I mean, that was my plan. Or I did kind of for a little while thought I might be a like library media specialist. But in my district, all like every school had 2 reading specialists, right? And they all had way more seniority than me. So I just saw there was a dead end there. And I wasn't going to switch districts because my district was kind of the best paying in the state. And so this opportunity came up. Actually, it's pregnant women is why I do what I do. Honestly, it's funny. The year that there was this opportunity to get trained as math recovery, there were like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 female teachers ahead of me, like seniority wise. I was a year or 2 in. I was really new. And the principal's like, hey, who wants to do this training with me this summer? I have money to pay for it, fully fund everything. And I looked around, they were all pregnant. Every single one of them that would have done it. And I'm like, I'll do it. So I got this great opportunity thanks to pregnant women. Yeah.
A whole gaggle of pregnant women.
Yeah.
Like in education, you plan to try and have your baby during the like end of year after testing.
Exactly.
Like it's a whole thing that people don't even realize.
It worked out really well for me.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how does the language we use as educators shape the beliefs, actions, and mathematical agency of our students?
Yeah. So this is something I've been kind of playing with, and it's been on my mind a lot. And so I put together some things to talk about, and some will directly kind of answer this question, I think, and some will be kind of on the periphery a little. Are we able to show that?
Yes.
Because that would be good to maybe talk from.
I was supposed to have it ready. I'm not doing great with that. Do you have it on your screen already?
I do.
So you can.
Let me see if I present.
Yeah. Sorry. I forgot about that.
Share screen. Oh no. It's like sharing screen. Yes.
We should have practiced this. We're very professional listeners.
Oh no. I need certain like permissions.
All right, let me just see. This is ridiculous, Heidi.
I got it. Hold on.
I have it open.
Oh.
I don't know why it's.
Oh wait. Oh, let me see. Is that it?
Oh wait, yeah, you did it.
Okay.
You did it.
Let me do this. There we go. Okay, that's better. So if that comes, okay. So I wanted to start with this quote. I love this quote. A while ago, I was in a different kind of position. I was working on this course that nothing ever came of it. It was all about equity and access. And what I found as I was working on that is like the more you dig in, the more layers there are. It's like this onion. You keep, if you think about identity, like, wow, it's just so deep. There's so many layers to it. So I was talking to this person, Gustavo, who worked at the Pride Center in Burlington, Vermont, where I used to live. And he said this, which really stuck with me. He said, the point of language isn't to harm, it's to communicate. So I was like, I think that's such a powerful message, right? To think about when we use words, when we use phrases, the things we're saying are all about communicating. And of course, right, we're human, we'll make mistakes, we'll say things that we didn't mean, or we might not understand the meaning yet. So those things happen, and we learn and we get better. So hopefully. So I wanted to ask you both what you notice about these words, if anything jumps out at you.
A lot of isms.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so I'm a gay man, and I actually have a problem with this word homophobia. I did a little color there just to make it really stand out. And so when I talk with this about folks, they've never really kind of had these thoughts before. So like an ism to me, and I could be wrong about this, please push back or share your thoughts. But to me, an ism like racism, sexism, it's your kind of, if you're doing that thing, if you're someone who's accused of or is being a racist or a sexist or whatever it is, you're kind of the bad person, right? It's put on you. To me, when I hear homophobia, it's like, oh, you're scared of something. You have this irrational fear because of this bad thing. So to me, it feels like the bad thing gets put on the wrong person. So what I think is a better word is heterosexism. And I've made tweets in the past about this. I'm doing it on Blue Sky now. But I think this just aligns so much better. And to me, this sends the message of, you think you're better than me because you're heterosexual or straight. Because honestly, in my life, I have never met a person who went yelling and screaming from me when they learned I was gay. I've talked with lots of people who I would say are heterosexist, but I've really never met a homophobic person because by definition, right, they would avoid me like a long distance. So that's one thing I've kind of been thinking about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. If that's a word you've ever heard before, if it's a new idea, old idea.
I have not heard the word heterosexism. It totally makes sense, especially when you line it up with all of those other words. I guess I don't use that word hardly at all. I mean, not heterosexism because it's new for me, but I guess I don't use the word homophobic very often. So, but I never have had to think, not being a gay woman, I guess I've never had to think very hard about it because it's not as personal to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and
you do hear it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, but it's that idea of having a fear of, so I have a fear of heights. That is very, and I forget, of course, what that's called at the moment, but it, like any of those phobia, like a needle phobia or a math phobia or a whatever, like those kinds of things, it's putting the bad first and then the other there. Whereas this is an act, like I see this more as an action versus a reaction.
Yeah.
Whereas I, like when I'm in a place where I'm in a tall space, it's a reaction to the tall space versus a behavior that I'm taking on.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it feels like it puts the blame or the focus on the person who's being heterosexist versus putting the focus on the person who's being discriminated against or marginalized or, whatever it is. Right. So I bring this up just because this is something I feel really strongly about, and I've had very little success kind of getting traction, getting it out there. But I think does this apply to young children? Probably not, right? I'm not going to use this word with young children, but I work with other colleagues, and if I'm, using language with colleagues that might make them feel marginalized because the language I'm using I don't understand, or don't, or just society uses that word. But we used to have color phobia, right? There was a history years and years ago, and that kind of went away because we learn and we do better. So that's one of my hopes in life, is that I can have an impact on our language around this word. I think it also gets really tricky, and I don't want to really talk about this because it's not I don't identify with it, but the whole transgender, right? There's transphobia. You hear all the time, oh, he's transphobic, or this person's transphobic. No, they're not. They just think they're better because they're cisgender. So I think it would be cisgenderism. But again, I don't want to represent that because it's not my expertise from lived experience.
Well, and I think that's coming into classrooms more and more, at least the conversation around what happens in classrooms, right?
Yeah.
And so when we rewrite history or whitewash history or intentionally leave out pieces of history, we do those same things, not because we're afraid of them. We might be afraid of the result of teaching those things, but not necessarily that there's a fear of the history, because it's still happened.
Yeah,
right.
but it's about power, though, right? It's about having the power over what is written about history and showing not the ugly parts of. I mean, there are lots of ugly parts of history, but hiding a lot of those ugly parts.
Right. So if I wanted to, take this and think about how does this impact, children in school? Obviously, older children, high school age, which I don't work with. You could have kids that are starting to identify in different ways. With young children, you're not going to have that as much. I think there are some that start to, but this is just one of the simple little kind of shifts in language. So instead of saying your mom and dad at home, or your parents at home, right? There's all sorts of different family makeups of kids in our schools, and just simply transitioning to your adult at home. The adults at home that take care of you, is a really elegant, kind of simple way to honor all different family structures, and not privilege one, right? Because when you say mom and dad, that's assuming everyone has a mom and dad. They had to have a mother and father to create them, but their lived experience isn't necessarily that. So that to me is just one simple way to because the more we make kids feel included, the more they have belonging, right? We know the better kids do when they feel like they belong somewhere.
Right.
And
I definitely made.
Sorry, go ahead, Mouse.
I definitely made a mistake with that one time when I was in a classroom, and often I'm in classrooms where I don't know the kids, and they were creating something. I think it was for Mother's Day, and I said, "Oh, you're going to give that to your mom." That kid's mom had died, and quite recently, and I felt horrible. I wanted to just fall down and crumble. So I can definitely hear you on that one.
Well, and it's like, but even that, like when we do those kind of activities in school, right? We think that we're doing something like in a positive way to appreciate the parent that we have at home or the adult that we have at home. But even I've gotten I've had to rethink even the at home piece. So like your caregiver or your adult, because the at home, when we have kids who are transient or who are living in temporary housing for one reason or another, or like, that's not my home. Right. And so that, but until we're in that situation, we don't like think about, like it's just one of the things that kind of rolls off. Oh, like even if we've made the switch to your adult or your caregiver at home, it's like another thing that we have to think about. Okay, like is this kid in a space where they like your house or your apartment like is different than your home?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, good point.
So another, for me, this is
this is what we were talking about today at school.
Right before
and
you got on.
You know, I wish I had an answer. Like, here's what you do, these simple steps, and it's I think it's a really complicated and pervasive issue. I see this, and I'm in lots of different schools in lots of different places. I've worked, I think, in 27 different states. I've been to 2 or 3 different countries overseas. And I pretty consistently hear this, and especially since the whole COVID pandemic, I hear about low students. Oh, that's my low student, or that's my high student, or this whole class is the lowest, kindergarten class I've ever had. And kind of along with that is this whole like tier 2 student, that's a tier 2 student. Those are all very like blankets. They kind of create an identity for a student that isn't really helpful. Right. And there's lots of research that I've looked at that suggests at least that that when we believe that students can learn, that they actually do learn. Right. So when we label a student as a low student or it's a tier 2 student, right, that becomes part of their being. It's really hard to communicate to them. And of course, we're never going to say to a kid, right, oh, well, you're a low student or you're a tier 2 student. But it pervades when we use this language professionally. And I don't think you'd ever run into an educator who would say, well, I don't think all kids can learn. I think most educators, if not all, would say, I believe all kids can learn. And yet we use this language. So I think about some shifts or subtle ways to help folks maybe move towards a more productive use of language. Because I always say, like, do your beliefs actually, are they communicated in the language you use, in professional settings? Are you actually communicating that you believe all kids can learn? So there's nothing wrong with saying this kid or this group of kids right now, they're low in this thing, right? They're low in their ability to count backwards from 20. That's a very specific, I can be really clear about that, and data will, show me where they're low. Or the whole idea of saying a student who's currently receiving tier 2 services, because that's not a life sentence. That's like a temporary thing. Well, right now they're receiving the services, but hopefully if the services work, they won't be. So this is another area that I think the language we use is so important, and subtle shifts we make can actually have a really powerful impact on students.
I agree. And I think that it's such a hard thing to undo in a district. It's real work because our structures are set up often to support those words.
Yes.
And so if your structure is not going to change, it's very hard to change the culture unless you're actually doing professional development to change that. I think, everyone's got to be doing it. Everyone has to understand the purpose of it. Everyone has to believe that kids can learn. And that in and of itself is really challenging, to find an entire school where everybody thinks that all kids can learn at high levels.
Yeah.
Well, and having the idea of like the structures that are in place, right? Like, so, and what we believe around those structures, whether it's grade levels, whether it's, has mastered, like, well, what does that mean? What, regardless of red, red, green, yellow, like we take one thing away and we slap another label on it, like as a replacement for, as if we're thinking that this is going to make it better or change the structure. It's like, we'll just change the name. I'm not going to change the structure. We'll just change the name.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, when that happens, we get that in our head. Oh, they're on the red part of my board. Or like, what that I had to turn into my building administrator. Like I had to look at all the kids after whatever benchmark test and sort them into groups. Versus think about what are the things that the kid is currently able to do. What's the next right thing for that child to be able to do?
It's a huge philosophy shift, I think, for some people, not all people.
Right.
But having a system that replaces it is the challenge part.
Yeah.
And here's how I know that this is an actual thing in actual schools is I do a lot of model lessons. So I'll go into a school, I'm teaching teachers to use talk moves, or I'm helping them to be able to do number talks. So I'm doing a model with their kids because, right, there's nothing more powerful than showing those things and having them done with their own children or the own children in your school. Even, if a teacher comes from a different classroom, they're seeing the kids at their school. And I can tell you almost always, but absolutely more often than not, a teacher will say to me, I can't believe you got that kid to talk,
right.
Or you got that kid to, I didn't realize they could do that. And it's just, I've had more than 10 years of doing this. And so I have so many examples of that where it's like, because you didn't believe your kids could actually, or certain kids could actually do those things.
Yeah, I had similar experience, when beginning to do vertical non-permanent surfaces. It was a similar idea to what you just described in the number talk, because it's giving them that opportunity to share their thinking. And hey, guess what? They do think. Turns out they do think.
If you give kids opportunity,
if
they
you
will.
give them the opportunity, they can do it. Right. And that's what it is about, even if your structures are not changing. I think I've been working in a lot of middle schools, so I think a lot of it that contributes to this kind of talk is that everybody's leveled. Yeah. You're in the high class, you're in the low class, whatever you call it, it does not matter. It doesn't matter. And it's unfortunate because that is the language that people use around that. And
the prestige of that, or the lack of prestige in that. And how that makes a difference in some spaces.
Yeah. Another thing that I think makes this hard, and TJ, don't get me wrong, this is all the work that I do. This is what I want people to do. I'm not being the complainer. It's just that these are the things that make this work hard. Now I forgot because I did all that explaining. Oh, my word. I'm really losing it. I'm really losing it. It's fine. All right.
Well, while you're thinking, Molly, let me just share this, because I want to move on to the other terms we have. But if you're not familiar with the Pygmalion effect, was some research that was done prior to me being born. So it was done in the 50s or 60s, I think. And it's fascinating what they found. It's controversial because they lied to teachers, right? You shouldn't lie to your subjects. But what they did in a nutshell is they gave teachers at the beginning of the year a roster full of kids, and they just randomly, there was no data with it, they just randomly selected one or two kids, and they said, oh my gosh, this kid, they are brilliant, this kid's so brilliant. And lo and behold, by the end of the year, guess who kind of rose to the top of the class? It was all those kids they just randomly selected and said were brilliant. So this idea that our belief in students' ability to learn, actually, that's the number one thing that helps them to learn. It's so powerful. And so the more we can focus on our language and be aware of our language, right? We're all going to slip. I've done, everyone's used these terms, right? Not with ill intent, but because, that, like you said, there's so many structures that support that much.
Yeah. As I was in the offices today at the school that I was working in, and as I see a kid leaving, like I don't know what this person's job is, but it was like a one-on-one situation, and this kid is leaving, and I hear the teacher inside saying, "I believe in you," like yelling it as the kid's walking out the door, whatever the kid had to go do. And I was just like, I'm so glad I witnessed that.
Yeah.
No one knows that I heard that or saw that. It just was great.
Right. That's awesome. So let's get mathy. So this one's fun for me. So do you know the difference between a table and a chart?
I can make a guess, but I don't know that I would formally have.
I feel like a table is what you use to put data in, or data points or something like, or even an in and out table. And a chart maybe shows the results of that.
Or the representation.
Yeah, I don't know. Am I even close?
So the only reason I know this is because I worked on, so prior to Common Core in Vermont, where I used to live, we had the grade level expectations, GLEs, and we shared those with other, I think every New England state except Massachusetts, because you're like your own country.
Yeah, we have to do our own thing. We have to be special.
And so we had to write curriculum to match for our district, to match the GLEs. You know, this is like early 2000s. And so I spent 3 years on a committee, kind of one of 3 people writing it. And we would have these in-depth conversations, which I love. And so this idea of the word table and chart came up, and there is, I believe, so I could be wrong, but in the math community, there's some disagreement about these terms. But as far as I understand it, a table and a chart are almost identical, except a table is organized. So it's organized either alphabetically or numerically, or time-wise, whereas a chart can just be a collection of information that doesn't really have any organization. And so often you'll hear teachers talk about a T-chart, right? But if you're organizing that, you've actually made a T-table, but it's not as kind of rolls off your tongue as well to say that. Yeah. So, but I just think that's interesting. And is it important for kids to know this difference? Probably not. But as educators, I think we should understand the difference between a table and a chart.
Well, now I know.
Yeah.
Again, one of your listeners might call me out, say they disagree. That will be an interesting conversation. Would love that.
I know. Well, you can go on the debate podcast.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. There we go. Table or chart.
Hey,
I don't know if there's enough there.
We have one for you.
Yeah. So here's one that I will fight to the death on. I despise the term count up and count down.
Yeah.
And in math recovery, we talked a lot about forward counting and backward counting. You can count on, you can count back or off, but counting up and down, we really don't count up and down a lot. You know, in our environment, there's elevators, they go up and down, there's thermometers, but other than those, there's not a lot of numbers systems that kind of go up and down environmentally. And David Sousa, who's the author of all the How the Brain Learns books, like he wrote How the Brain Learns Mathematics, he talks about how we have this innate number line in our head, and it kind of goes out more than anything. So it doesn't go up and down, it goes kind of horizontally. And it's one of the reasons young children will think like the distance between 0 and 1 is bigger, because 0, 1, and then you start counting, you're getting further away from yourself. So like the distance between 19 and 20 feels like it's smaller because it's further away from you and you don't have this like sense of space as much. So I just thought that was fascinating. And where I see this really, the rubber meet the road with this is when you get to like hundreds charts. Because right, you're actually physically directionally going down on a hundreds chart, but you're actually going up. in numbers. So really, you can count forward, up or down, or left or right, and then backward would be the opposite of whatever that is. So to me, forward and backward is a much more precise term. And especially when we talk about multilingual students, right? You start counting up. Well, up becomes this directional term that's really challenging. So if we're trying to support our students, the language of count up and count down are no good.
Yeah. Well, it's that piece of like how you learn the word up or you learn the word down and what those mean when you are learning, just like vocabulary wise, that makes a big, it makes a big difference in how students really understand that language.
Yeah, right. I remember, I think it was Jennifer Bay Williams and Graham Fletcher made the upside down.
Yeah, which right? I love that. Like, if we're going to use it, let's make it make sense.
Right. Well, I don't know. I guess I kind of was thinking, if we use forward and backward, right, if we're consistent with that as an educational community, is there really a need to change? Because the nice thing about the 100 chart is it follows the direction of reading. You go left to right, you go top to bottom. So when you're using forward and backward, then it doesn't become an issue with the 100 chart.
It's true.
Yeah.
Molly and I do a lot of work around integers with vertical number lines. And so it is this, and so counting up the, like in that case, I would like the only case that I could see like 6, 7, 8 when we're introducing elevation and, you know, and the vertical number, like, cause I feel like that's where it really, I mean, at least it shows up in Common Core standard language, in that space. And so it's always interesting, but you could still use forward or backwards, which I feel like we do on a horizontal number line, but on a vertical one, that's a little bit more tricky.
Right. But at least then you actually are going up, right? And then I would just pair it. You're counting up and you're going forward. You know, works. It works. All right. Here's another one.
Yes.
And I've just had many, many conversations. And I recently, actually, I was with some kindergarten, first grade teachers, I'd say in the last couple of years in New York City. And I was a little surprised how many had not heard about number paths. So this idea of number lines, number paths, and I can't take credit for this. I didn't create this language. It was, I learned it from a first grade teacher who shared with me the focal point work from NCTM. And so they created the focal points for every grade level. And then the year after, I think it was maybe 2001, they came out with teaching with the focal points. And in there, they talk about how a number line is an inappropriate tool for kindergarten and first grade students, right? Like, this is not TJ saying this. This is like NCTM respected institution. But then people have this like emotional reaction, like, oh my gosh, I've damaged children. I'm bad. That's not the intention at all.
No.
And young children should see models of number lines. But if they're in their hot little hands, they should be using number paths.
Yeah.
And then just in case there's listeners out there that, don't know the difference, basically a number path is about sequence, forward and backwards. And so you could have individual cards and they could be spaced differently. And that doesn't matter, because if they're sequenced correctly, forward and backward, right? That's the important part. And then you kind of get these, I did a studying of because I did a presentation on this and looked at a lot of different like name tags people have on desks. And there's all these different versions and kind of hybrid number path, number lines. And so you'll see a lot of number paths that, like, if you take a hundreds chart and cut it apart, it becomes a number path if you kind of tape it together. But it's the difference between that and a number line. Number path is a discrete model. So you have an item, like a box with a number in it for each number. A number line is interval. So it's the measurement between intervals. And so 0 would show up on a number line, but not necessarily on a number path.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was an interesting, again, is this important? I'm not going to slap a little kindergartner's hand. No, that's a number path, not a number line, right? That's not important. But as educators, I think it's important we understand the difference between these because, and technically a number path is an early number line. So it's kind of like that big circle number line and then smaller circle inside number path. But it's so important for educators to understand, because if I don't understand the difference, I'm going to be giving young learners a number line when they really should be getting a number path. So that was another one I thought was an important kind of bring to the surface, discuss. Love to hear either of your thoughts about number lines, number paths.
Well, we have used a study where giving young students a number path that had the end of it filled in. So like, if I'm counting backward, 1097 is filled in, and then there's all these spaces that go past 0. Like if we were to just count. And so just this idea of how we build in understanding with a number path for what happens on the other side of 0, and how young kids can absolutely like wrestle with that understanding. And they do understand that things happen on that side of the number line.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't think I really thought about those terms at all until we started investigating integers and trying to understand what is so hard about integers and how can we make it so that it's not so hard for kids. And that's where we started looking at that study, and the ideas that kids have of numbers that are to the left of 1 are really, really quite logical and interesting to see using a number path.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it would translate the same as on a number line, Heidi, actually.
No, I'm thinking they would just ignore it, because if they had experience with like an open number line, they might choose like, I don't need that part.
Yeah. I guess.
But I could be wrong.
Right. So it's interesting that you said an early number line, because that is how it's viewed, and which is why we started to look at that with integers, even though kids already know number lines when they are starting with integers. We can use the idea of the number path because this content is new for them.
Right. I love that because it supports them with something that's more concrete, right? A number path is more concrete. It's a discrete item. Which is why it's
maybe the beaded number line is a path, Heidi.
Yeah. I think so. Absolutely. Yeah.
That would make
items.
Yeah. That would make sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
All right.
Hey, sorry I disappeared for a moment.
Okay. I'm glad you're back.
Oh my, yes, you are, because no one else can turn the show off.
Oh yeah. We were here for a while. I was like, okay, this will be interesting.
So here's another one that part of my story earlier, I talked about how I, have been on this journey the last 20 years. I've been doing myself learning content and pedagogy. And one of the contents I really dug deeply into, thanks to folks in Vermont, is OGAP, which is the ongoing assessment project.
Love that.
Right. And so I learned from like the people who did all the research. Some of the research was done in the school I worked in. And the fraction work is the kind of the first stuff they did. And so I was intensely involved with this. I was like the first cohort of people they trained to then go and do the training of OGAP with other teachers. So it was a 4-credit class all year long. The first half was I was a participant and I learned all the stuff. And the second half was I actually taught a fraction unit with 5th graders and then taught a cohort of teachers, all the the stuff I had learned previously. So I asked for a volunteer teacher because I didn't have my own classroom at the time. And I had 2 fifth grade teachers. They were so nice. They're like, TJ, we'll give our classes together. So I had 38 fifth graders. And of those 38, I got only 37 to move. There was one kid that really made me upset because he was that one kid that didn't move, but the others had this amazing growth. But anyhow, in all of this, and I've done multiple cohorts of people to train them around OGAP, I've found this to be something that I hear with language when people talk about fractions. And when you hear kids talk about fractions, they'll say, well, it's an even amount, right? It's halves because they're even. And I believe, but again, please feel free to push back. I believe that that's a misuse of the word even, where I think we want it to be equal, right? They both start with E, they're kind of similar, but I hear kids saying this all the time. Like they'll reason that something is fourths or thirds because they're even pieces. But when you really start thinking about it, like if you have thirds and you're talking about even pieces, like thirds are, 3 is an odd number, right? So to say they're even pieces, I don't know, it just started hurting my head. So I got into this mode of like, just kind of bringing awareness to this for educators when they have kids that will use this language, because I guarantee you they will. And anyone who's out there listening, if you look for it now, you'll hear kids saying, oh, even halves, even eighths, even pieces. They use it all the time.
I'm going to start listening for that. I don't feel like I've heard that, but maybe I'm entirely wrong, and I just keep thinking I'm hearing equal. I'm going to start listening.
Yeah. What about you, Heidi? Have you seen it or heard it?
I have not heard that as much. Like I hear they're the same more often.
Yeah.
So like they're the same piece, or they're like, so they're thirds, like 1/3, 2/3. Those 2 pieces are the same. They're not using the word equal, but they're using same.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to start listening.
There's a certain word for it. Someone called it, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name. She called it the Subaru effect. It's the idea that like once you hear something, then you see it all the time.
Oh yeah.
Like, how did I miss this before? But
right, like when you're buying a new car, you don't ever pay attention to cars, but then all of a sudden you see them everywhere. Is that the Subaru effect?
Right. Yes. So I think those are all the ones I had kind of thought of. Like this was a running list I've had for a while. That I find I've had lots of seen lots of examples of. So I was wondering if either of you had any that, you wanted to add to that list.
What are you thinking about, Heidi?
I'm thinking, I had one example. Now I'm not remembering what it was. It was from where I was yesterday. Like just kind of goes by like strategy versus
model.
I hear quite a bit. And then also I had a couple of teachers at the high school level who were like, well, is that really a strategy or is it just the algorithm? And like that they've learned that they like, and so they're plugging numbers in, but they're not actually reasoning. So like, does strategy have to include some reasoning, or can it be without? And I was like, interesting. I have to think on that a little more.
I do think that's challenging distinction. And I think probably most people do have that confused. A model can be used to illustrate a strategy.
Well, the same model could be used to illustrate multiple strategies.
Right. Especially a number line, right? A number line can be used for
counting on, counting back.
Oh, no, counting forward, counting backwards.
Oh, yes. True. Like, skip counting, like all of those things could be shown on a number line.
Right. Yeah. Like you could show compensation, you can show constant difference, you can show all these different strategies using the same model. Yeah.
And then, but like, and I had a student, so it was I was coming into a classroom to speak with a teacher at the end of class. And so they're working on polynomial division. It's very exciting. And, but it was this idea that they were working on an IM lesson that had an example next to polynomial division where it was just the same numbers without having a variable, and showing that in long division. And the student asked me later, does that work all the time? Like, why are they showing us that? And then the teacher and I were talking like, it doesn't if the number is negative. And so like, so the student was like, well, why did they show that model? And I was like, that's a fantastic question.
Why don't you ask your teacher?
Find someone who had a part in putting that model in there, because like in many spaces it worked. And then it didn't. And I was like, ooh, like.
Right. But I guess like how awesome that the kid did ask that though, right? Because it is a good conversation to have, and it didn't work. Good to find that out.
Right, because it did in the other, like in the first example, in the warm up, in the notice and wonder, it worked. It was just all of the numbers without the variables, all the digits without the variables, like in that same order. And, but the term didn't have a coefficient, like, and that didn't work. Like, so there was multiple places where it was not going to work, but like, started the lesson off with it working. And I was like, I'm going to have to get back to you. Like, fantastic question. So great. We're having this conversation. You know,
let's try it. Like, let's see.
Yeah. Or like doing all the things that come in the next couple of lessons. We're like, no, this is not going to work like all the way through. So why are we doing this?
Yeah.
But that's kind of a nice, I don't know, like definition of math, right? Like it's not easily tied up with a bow in one lesson. Like it's gonna, I need to go think about this. I think that's a great response.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I had been in more classrooms recently, but I really only worked with teachers this month outside of the classroom. So I don't feel like I have more things that I can think of right now. Plus, it's December and my brain is leaking out of my ears.
I mean, I could go really deep into all the, I think we were talking about this earlier, but the like number sense routines. What is a number talk for? What's a number string versus a problem string? And, but I'm hoping in the future, maybe they'll have a little more definition around those things. Yeah.
Little encyclopedia, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we would love for people to find out more about where they can learn more about you and the work that you're doing. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, someday I'll make a website, but I don't have a website now. I have curated a list of number sense routines that are kind of all free, and, you know, like which one doesn't belong, and same but different, all the, so many different ones out there, splat, all of those, and just in one place. It's a Google page, a Google Doc. So you can find me on Twitter at TGVT. There we are. And I'm now kind of transitioning a little more active on Blue Sky. So there I am on Blue Sky TJ Math. I thought I'd change up my name, make it a little easier to find. And like I said, eventually I might have a website, but we'll see.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here with us tonight, whatever time it is, wherever you are.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. always love to talk to people that we have also been able to meet in person. Like sometimes we
Yeah.
meet people
Right.
online first and then we meet them in person, and other
Yeah.
times we have met in
Yeah,
real
we
life.
met down in New Orleans last year, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had a great time there. So it was
Good
first
stuff.
time down there.
Yeah.
Well, that's another place you can find me. I'll be at the that joint conference. NCT and NCTM is happening in June of 2025, and it'll be in Chicago. I'm on the program committee, so I'm going to be in short order here reviewing proposals. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we wish you much luck with that.
Thank you.
And we're super happy to have had this conversation with you today. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
All right.
Good night.
All right.
That was awesome. You got a lot to think about.
Yeah. I think, there are so many things that we could talk about there. I wish my brain wasn't so empty. It's fine. It's fine. It will fill back up in the new year, right?
No. And yes, speaking of, we're taking the rest of 2024 off. It's like so much time left in the year. But we are really excited to start the new year with our friend Jenna. And so we will be back on January 16th.
Yes. And if you would like, take a look at our book at Didex. Has lots of good activators with some of the things that TJ was talking about. There's models in there. There's lots of different strategies that you can use, and number strings, number talks, the whole thing. So until we see you next time, we'd love for you to keep math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.